Forget the headlines about economic growth. A real story of China's rise isn't in numbers, but in an almost mythical work ethic that powers it all. What if I revealed the hidden layers of history, philosophy, and societal pressures that don't just encourage, but demand unparalleled diligence? Behind the world-leading GDP figures and super high-tech infrastructure projects lies a cultural framework that shapes how hundreds of millions approach their daily work. This framework did not emerge from policy alone. It was forged over centuries through philosophical traditions, agricultural necessity, and social structures that continue to influence behavior today. Understanding Chinese work ethic requires moving beyond stereotypes to examine the historical forces, cultural mechanisms, and modern pressures that sustain patterns of sustained effort and collective coordination. Get ready to uncover the profound cultural bedrock that cultivates China's distinctive national character and propels its people forward. The roots of Chinese work culture extend deep into philosophical and agrarian traditions. Confucianism, which emerged over 2 millennia ago, established principles that connected personal cultivation to social harmony. The tradition emphasized self-improvement through disciplined effort, respect for hierarchy, and the belief that individual virtue contributes to collective stability. These were not abstract concepts, but practical guidelines for maintaining order in a vast society. Hard work was framed as a moral obligation rather than merely economic necessity. The concept of cultivating oneself, expressed through study and diligence, became embedded in social expectations. Success was not viewed as luck, but as the natural result of persistent effort. This philosophical foundation created a cultural logic where working hard carried ethical weight beyond material gain. Agriculture reinforced these values through practical necessity. For centuries, Chinese civilization depended on intensive farming in regions with variable climate and limited arable land per capita. Rice cultivation in particular required meticulous coordination, careful water management, and sustained labor throughout growing seasons. Communities that failed to maintain collective discipline faced food insecurity. The agrarian calendar demanded peak effort during planting and harvest, with little margin for individual deviation from communal schedules. This agricultural heritage produced what scholars term a rice culture that valued patience, attention to detail, and interdependence. Unlike pastoral or hunting societies, where individual initiative often determined outcomes, rice farming required synchronized group effort. The lesson was clear. Prosperity emerged from coordinated persistence, not individual prowess alone. The imperial examination system, which operated for over 13 centuries until the early 20th century, institutionalized merit-based advancement. Officials were selected through rigorous testing of Confucian classics and literary ability. In theory, any male could study and compete regardless of family background. In practice, success required years of intensive preparation, often supported by extended family investment. This system created a powerful social narrative. Effort and study could elevate families across generations. Stories of poor scholars rising to high office became cultural touchstones. The examinations were extraordinarily competitive, with pass rates frequently below 5%. Yet the mere possibility of advancement through diligent study shaped educational values that persist today. The system ended in 1905, but the belief that rigorous academic effort leads to social mobility remained deeply rooted. Several cultural mechanisms translate historical values into contemporary work behavior. These operate not through formal enforcement, but through social expectations and identity formation. The concept of face, known as mianzi, functions as a powerful social currency. Face represents one's standing and reputation within a community. It can be gained through achievements, respectability, and fulfilling social obligations. It can also be lost through failure, impropriety, or letting down those who depend on you. The system creates strong incentives to meet expectations and avoid public shortcomings. In work contexts, face operates as both motivation and constraint. Professional success enhances personal face and reflects well on family and social networks. Conversely, failing to meet commitments or demonstrating inadequate effort can result in social diminishment. This is not mere embarrassment, but a tangible loss of social capital that affects relationships and opportunities. The mechanism encourages consistent performance and discourages shortcuts that might lead to public failure. Family obligation adds another layer of motivation. Traditional Chinese culture emphasizes filial piety, the duty children owe to parents and ancestors. This includes material support for aging parents and ensuring the family's reputation and prosperity continue. For many workers, career success is not primarily about personal fulfillment, but about meeting intergenerational responsibilities. The economic reforms since 1978 intensified these dynamics. The one-child policy, in effect from 1980 to 2015, meant individual children bore sole responsibility for supporting two parents and often for grandparents. This demographic reality transformed work into a family's survival strategy. High savings rates and long working hours can be understood partly as responses to these structural obligations. Workers are not simply pursuing individual advancement, but securing family welfare across generations. National identity provides a collective dimension to work motivation. The concept of national rejuvenation, articulated through the China Dream narrative, frames individual effort as contribution to collective resurgence after historical humiliation. This is not empty propaganda, but connects to genuine historical memory of foreign intervention and internal turmoil during the 19th and 20th centuries. For many Chinese citizens, economic development represents restoration of national standing. Working hard becomes participation in a historical project larger than personal gain. This collective framing helps explain the willingness to endure demanding conditions that might seem excessive by other cultural standards. The work is not just for oneself or family, but for the nation's position in global hierarchy. Current conditions intensify and channel these cultural predispositions. China's education system produces massive numbers of graduates competing for limited premium positions. Annual university entrance examinations, the Gaokao, determine access to elite institutions. Millions of students prepare intensively, often for years, knowing that small score differences can determine life trajectories. This academic competition extends into labor markets. Major cities have abundant supplies of educated workers, creating fierce competition for desirable jobs. The ratio of applicants to positions at prestigious companies or government bureaus can exceed 100 to 1. In such environments, simply meeting basic requirements is insufficient. Standing out requires demonstrated dedication that often means extended hours, continuous skill development, and willingness to exceed formal job descriptions. The 996 work schedule, meaning 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days per week, became symbolic of tech sector demands. While not universal and increasingly controversial, such schedules reflect expectations in competitive industries. Companies in technology, finance, and consulting often maintain intense work cultures where long hours signal commitment. Declining such expectations can limit advancement or even employment opportunities. These practices exist within legal frameworks that technically limit working hours. But enforcement varies and social pressure often overrides formal protections. Workers may feel unable to refuse overtime or extended availability without damaging career prospects. The cultural emphasis on diligence makes it difficult to distinguish reasonable dedication from exploitation, as many workers internalize these demands as necessary for success. Technological competition adds urgency to these patterns. Chinese companies operate in global markets where innovation cycles are rapid and international competitors are formidable. In sectors like telecommunications, artificial intelligence, and e-commerce, falling behind can mean losing market position permanently. This creates organizational pressure for fast execution and continuous output. The government's strategic emphasis on technological self-sufficiency, particularly in semiconductors and advanced manufacturing, frames technological work as nationally important. Engineers and researchers understand their work carries strategic weight beyond commercial success. This adds another motivational layer beyond salary or career advancement. Contribution to national technological capability becomes part of professional identity. These work patterns carry significant implications for global economic competition. Countries with comparable wage levels cannot easily match China's combination of skilled labor, work intensity, and coordinated execution. This provides competitive advantages in manufacturing efficiency, project completion speed, and ability to scale operations rapidly. Infrastructure development illustrates this dynamic. China has constructed vast high-speed rail networks, urban transit systems, and renewable energy installations on timelines that would be difficult to replicate elsewhere. These achievements reflect not just capital investment, but organizational capacity to mobilize labor, maintain demanding schedules, and coordinate across multiple stakeholders. The cultural acceptance of intense work periods enables project execution at speeds that become strategic assets. In technology sectors, Chinese companies have achieved rapid market growth, partly through sustained high-intensity development cycles. Products iterate quickly, features expand continuously, and market responses occur with minimal delay. This operational tempo creates advantages in fast-moving consumer markets and puts pressure on international competitors to match pace. However, these patterns also generate internal tensions. Younger generations, particularly those born after 1990, increasingly question the sustainability of extreme work cultures. Social media discussions criticize 996 schedules and debate work-life balance. The lying flat movement, though overstated in Western media, reflects real frustration among some young people who feel that despite intense effort, major life goals like home ownership remain unattainable. Demographic shifts compound these concerns. As the population ages and the working age cohort shrinks, maintaining productivity through sheer labor input becomes less viable. The economy must shift toward higher value-added activities that depend more on innovation and efficiency than on extended hours. This transition requires different incentives and potentially different cultural attitudes toward work. International economic integration also introduces alternative models. Chinese professionals working with foreign companies or studying abroad encounter different approaches to work organization and career development. These experiences can shift expectations about what constitutes reasonable demands versus unnecessary overwork. While traditional values remain influential, exposure to alternative frameworks creates space for evolving norms. Several dynamics will shape how Chinese work culture develops. Demographic necessity will push toward productivity gains through technology rather than labor intensity. As the workforce contracts, especially in younger cohorts, companies must find ways to achieve more with fewer workers. This favors automation, artificial intelligence, and process optimization over simply working longer hours. Government policy signals show recognition of these challenges. Recent labor regulations have attempted to curb excessive overtime, though enforcement remains inconsistent. Public rhetoric increasingly emphasizes innovation quality over sheer output quantity. These shifts suggest official awareness that the old model of growth through intensive labor deployment has limits. Economic maturation also changes incentives. As China moves beyond middle-income status, consumption becomes more important for sustaining growth. This requires workers who have time and energy to consume, not just produce. Overwork that suppresses domestic consumption becomes economically counterproductive. The transition from investment-led to consumption-led growth thus carries implications for work culture. Younger workers possess more bargaining power in certain sectors where skills are scarce. Technology companies competing for top talent have begun offering better work conditions to attract and retain employees, while still demanding by many international standards. These improved conditions represent cracks in the previously unquestioned acceptance of extreme schedules. Market forces may gradually moderate the most excessive practices where labor supply is tight. However, cultural values change slowly. The underlying frameworks that make diligence a virtue connect work to family obligation and tie individual effort to collective goals will not disappear quickly. These elements will more likely adapt than vanish. Future Chinese work culture may blend traditional dedication with modified expectations about hours, balance, and individual well-being. The global implications depend partly on whether other societies can develop comparable organizational capacities without replicating cultural pressures that many Chinese citizens themselves find burdensome. China's economic model has depended significantly on work intensity that reflects specific historical and cultural circumstances. As those circumstances evolve, the model itself must adjust. How successfully China navigates this transition will influence both its domestic development and its competitive position in knowledge-intensive industries. Chinese work ethic emerges from identifiable, historical, philosophical, and structural factors rather than inherent national characteristics. Confucian values, agricultural traditions, meritocratic ideals, family obligations, and contemporary competitive pressures combine to create distinctive patterns of effort and coordination. These patterns have provided economic advantages, but also generate tensions as conditions change and expectations evolve. Understanding these dynamics requires moving beyond simple narratives of cultural superiority or exploitation. The reality involves complex interactions between tradition and modernity, individual motivation and collective pressure, economic necessity and cultural meaning. As China's economy matures and its society evolves, these interactions will produce new configurations that shape the future of work within the world's second-largest economy. For those seeking to understand global economic competition, technological development, and shifting power dynamics, these cultural and structural factors matter as much as policy decisions or capital flows. They influence how quickly countries can execute strategies, how sustainable their growth models prove, and how internal social pressures shape future directions. If this analysis provided useful perspective on the cultural forces shaping economic behavior, consider subscribing for regular coverage that examines the strategic, economic, and social dimensions of global developments. We focus on clarity and context rather than headlines, helping you understand the structures that drive international affairs. More analysis continues in upcoming coverage. See you in the next one.